Hello everyone, it's time for church history. Last time we talked about the people that appear as Herod in the Bible, and they're not the same person, but there are several different types of Herods. It's not likely that you'll have a precise knowledge of church history when you hear these stories. And if you were to find each one of these Herods in the Bible to clarify, you might find it difficult and confusing. You don't have to remember them all as a reference as you hear them. And as you move on, what should remain in your heart is that it's recorded as Herod in the Bible. Now, it's not the same Herod, but there are several different Herods. And that's all you really have to remember. The Herod who tried to kill Jesus, and when Jesus was born, and the Herod who tried to behead John the Baptist when he chastised him, they're not the same Herod. They may have the same title, but they're very different people. Many people know them as one person, and that is the reason why when you try to study church history, it's recorded as the same name Herod, but they're all different people. There was Herod the Great, which comes out in Matthew chapter 2, and under Herod the Great there is Herod Archelaus, Herod Antipas, Herod Philip, and the grandchild of Herod the Great is Herod Agrippa. Herod Agrippa is Herod the Great's grandchild, and you should know this as a reference while we move on. Wow, these entire historical events and all of these historical acknowledgments is mentioned in church history. What if all these would be questioned and examined by writing a report? You wouldn't have to be worried about that. But just know as a reference that all these people are titled the same but are different people. So they are not one person. So please just know that from now on. This time I want to talk about James. When we look in the Bible, there is a person named James. So first, there is the Apostle James. He is one of the apostles among 12 other apostles. His brother is Apostle John, and he is the son of Zebedee and Salome. The second James appears in Matthew chapter 4 verse 21 and Mark chapter 1 verse 19. And he is the older brother of Apostle John. Biblical scholars separated both of the James the Apostle, James the Great, and Apostle James the Less, who is the son of Alphaeus. So there is an expression saying Apostle James is James the Great, and the other James, other than the Apostle James, is the son of Alphaeus, right? So the scholars distinguish that James, who is the son of Alphaeus, is James the Less. That's what they call him. Apostle James the Great lived as a fisherman in Galilee, and he became a disciple of the Lord with his brother Apostle John. Among the apostles, John is the closest aid to the Lord, with Peter and John, who received the love from the Lord the most. Even among the 12 disciples of the Lord, these three people, Peter, James, and John, are mentioned the most. When they say Peter, James, and John, John is representing Apostle James. Apostle James was the first apostle who was martyred during the persecution of Herod Agrippa I in 44 AD. Martyrdom of Apostle James is written in Acts chapter 12 verse 2. Through the records in Matthew chapter 27, Mark chapter 15 verse 40, Mark chapter 16, and John chapter 19 verse 25, some people argue that Apostle James's aunt is Mary, who is the mother of Jesus Christ, because James's mother, Salome, is the sister of Mary. If this is so, Apostle James is a maternal cousin of Jesus Christ, so he belongs in the family tree of David. James is always recorded with John, and usually the name James is mentioned before John. It's recorded as Peter, James, then John, and never in the order as Peter, John, and James. In the 12 disciples of Jesus, people assumed it's recorded as Peter, James, and then John. And it's because maybe John was the younger brother of James, and James was the older brother. This apostle John was very hot-tempered, and he was the one who got very upset because a certain village in Samaria did not receive the name of Jesus. He said, "Should I make the fire come down from heaven and burn this village?" The second James, the first I wanted to talk about, is James, son of Alphaeus. The James who was called James the Less. It's estimated that the mother of the son of Alphaeus is a woman named Mary, and that she was among the ladies who acted with Jesus. When we look at Acts chapter 15, verse 40 and 41, there are a lot of people who think that Mary, who was one of the women who was always with Jesus, and also went to the tomb on the morning of the resurrection after the crucifixion. There was another James, and this James is the flesh brother of the Lord. And also went to the tomb on the morning of the resurrection after the crucifixion. There was another James, and this James is the flesh brother of the Lord. He is the brother of Jesus and was born between Mary and Joseph. There were 4 brothers who were born between Mary and Joseph. So this James is the brother right under Jesus. Jesus was born through the Holy Spirit between Mary and Joseph. And then there was James, Joseph, Simon, and Judah. So James was the older brother of them all. And it is recorded in Galatians chapter 2 verse 9 by Paul saying that he became the cornerstone of the Jerusalem church. Leading the Jerusalem church and considered as the pillar of the church, about the brother of Jesus, James, it only comes out twice in the gospel. He appears in Matthew chapter 13 verse 55 and Mark chapter 6 verse 3. And before, when Jesus was crucified, James was in a state of mind of not believing precisely in the Lord. However, he saw that Jesus was resurrected and he believed in the Lord. And that is recorded in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verse 7. When we looked at that, we can see how James gained the assurance of the Lord. He has seen the resurrection of the Lord, and he enters in one of the disciples of the Lord. However, in Acts chapter 15, there was a meeting in Jerusalem. One of the leaders who led the convention in Jerusalem was this James. And also in the beginning, there was a time where he had fellowship with Paul. There is also a book of James in the Bible, right? The writer of James in the Bible is this particular James according to the history of Judea. It was recorded that this James, he died a martyr when there was a riot of the Jews in 62 AD. And then there is another James who is the father of Apostle Judas. When we look at Luke chapter 6 verse 16, Acts chapter 1 verse 13, Matthew and Mark, it's all recorded that this James was tedious. So people distinguished James, and they didn't record the brothers of John and James, but because there were several Jameses, they were afraid of the confusion. So they recorded as brother of John and James, son of Alphaeus. The brother of John, who is James the Less, is the son of Alphaeus, right? And then the brother of the Lord, who is James, is the writer of the book of James. When the name James comes out in the Bible, just know this as a reference that it's not the same person, but it's distinguished like this. It won't be on any sort of test, so don't be burdened. If you think it's the same person, and it should be a misunderstanding if you consider James at all the same person. They all might have the same name, but they are distinguished as very different people. Again, know this as a reference. Those people who want to research and study the Bible more precisely know that the Bible distinguishes these people one by one, and they may talk about certain Jameses during certain parts. Continuing from here, there are very important historical events, and one of them that we must mention is the destruction of Jerusalem. The destruction of Jerusalem is closely connected with the fulfilling of the prophecies that the Lord had spoken in Luke chapter 19 verse 21. And not only it will help you to understand the Bible, but also the prophecies that the Lord has prophesied in the destruction of Jerusalem. And that was carried on in 70 AD by a general by the name of Titus of Rome. Through him, the city of Jerusalem was destroyed, and the rampant was demolished. The Jews were caught by the Gentiles, and they were sold. When you know this process clearly, and that's when you know that the Bible is truly living and that these words are the truth. The word of the Lord is truly the truth. When we know precisely about the destruction of Jerusalem, when you hear about it, and then the trust towards God will be strengthened. And I believe your faith will also strengthen as well. So I want to take some time on these parts, and I want to speak to you in details for several hours. I worked at a school for several years, and there was a teacher who majored in world history. She told me ones that regard who that person is. If they know precisely the history of the Jews, they can't help but to know that God is living and that the Bible is truly the truth. If you precisely know the history of the Jews, and when you take a better look at how the word of the Lord had been accomplished in the history of man, then anyone would say that this Bible is the truth. The word of the Lord is achieved, and that everyone would realize and believe in it. As we study church history, we will gain spiritual counseling from learning more about church history. We get to know the victory of God who is governing and leading mankind. And we will also get to realize the power of God. However, in addition, when you precisely get to know church history and you start connecting the history and the background of the word that is recorded in the Bible, then your trust for the Bible will become stronger in your heart as well as your faith. Before Jesus came down to the earth, Israel was under the control of Rome. And last time we spoke about the dynasty of Herod. While Rome was controlling Israel, Rome had anointed governors in Judah. And so those governors would control Israel at first. Herod Agrippa was governing Israel, and when he died, from 44 AD through 66 AD is when the land of Judah became Palestine. Several Roman procurators began to govern Israel, and while they were governing, their main job was to serve as financial deputies for Rome. They did the work of collecting the tax that was assigned to the Jews from Rome, and the procurators also did the work of commanding the military of the nation that belonged under Rome. They also did the work of judging in various important events, such things as judging Jesus and of that sort. But their main purpose was to collect tax, command the army, and judge various events. When Herod Agrippa died is when the 7 Roman procurators were dispatched to Rome around the time of 44 AD through 66 AD. At first, the procurator named Faust came, and then continuing after Faust, there was a procurator named Alexander. Then there came Cumanus, and after Cumanus, when reading the Bible, it was Felix, right? Who continues to be dispatched to Judah. Then, continuing from Felix, was Festus. And Festus was dispatched, and when we read about Festus, there was a record that he wanted to leave. He said that not long after he'd be leaving Judah, and it has a record in the Bible. So this Festus was dispatched as a procurator of Judah, but he lacked the capability of controlling Judah. So not long after, he was replaced, and that is what was recorded in the Bible. So the governor named Albinus is dispatched after this, and continuing from Governor Albinus is a Roman governor named Florus. He is assigned. This governor Florus was very cruel, ruthless, and unsympathetic. He suppressed Jews and seized wealth and killed and abused people, so that Jews cannot even endure and can't help but to cause a riot. He was someone that caused that kind of atmosphere, and he was only interested in power and greed. As this governor Florus suppresses the Jews ruthlessly and crudely the Jews, they couldn't take it anymore, and they caused a riot. Before, there was a general in Rome named Pompeius, and this general ends the Hasmonean dynasty. At the time of General Pompeius, they began to put the governor in Judah to control them. So originally there was no governor in the land of Judah, but General Pompeius sent a governor for the first time in Judah, and that is how Judah started getting controlled by the government. So, as they were being governed by Rome, the person who Rome anointed in Jerusalem was Herod. As I spoke last time, Herod was a half-Jew who was born in the south side of Philistine. And so because he wasn't a full original Jew, the Jews did not like Herod that much at all. Herod had to gain favor from Rome, and he also had to gain popularity from the Jews who didn't like him because they didn't consider him one of them. So, in order to gain favor from Rome, he would collect tax, pay it to Rome, and also to gain popularity from the Jews, he built a temple for the Jews and built many buildings very luxuriously. Thanks to that, Jerusalem turned very beautiful and became an outstanding city. However, even though Herod built a grand, luxurious, brilliant temple for the but unfortunately the temple didn't last long. Also, when Nero was serving as an emperor of Rome, the emperor dispatched Felix of Judah as a governor of Judah, and they made a governor of Israel of him. So Felix that comes out in the Bible was the governor of Judah who was dispatched by Emperor Nero. And those after Felix, Festus came, and after Festus was Alphaeus. This governor Alphaeus was very cruel, and he was a very ruthless governor. Alvinus committed all kinds of misdeeds, taking the wealth of Jews, placing heavy taxes on them, and he started to abuse his power. After that, the governor Florus was appointed. He was even greedier. He was an even more violent governor. He wasn't even compared with Alphaeus. So, he took all kinds of methods in order to take the wealth of the Jews. He killed Jews at random. He suppressed them and completely ignored the opinions of the Jews. He did all sorts of evil, put Judah into ruin, and the Jews started to become angry, especially in Judah. In Judah, there is a fraction called Zealots in the Bible. Their official title in Judah those people, who belonged to the Zealots, they were very intense. They were patriots of the Jews, and they're a radical of Judaism, or those people who insisted on becoming independent from a foreign power. Those people from the Zealot group, and those people who goes against Rome. So these people, they united, and then they shouted, "Let's push foreign power out and push Romans out. So these people from the Zealot group were those people who went against the oppression of Rome, always carried knives in order to kill the people who agreed with Rome. They carried knives with them, and if anyone agreed with Rome or those people who did something against their heart, they would kill those people randomly. So Jews were suffering from the oppression of Rome, and they also felt the intense fear from the radicals of Judah, even though they were the same race. So those intense people of the Zealot group are those people that went against Rome, or the ultra-naturalists. And because these people created fear, they created apprehension. On top of that, because Florus had such a violent policy, the Jews' complaints toward Rome were beginning to build up. Now, the procurators were, which are the governors now, right? Florus, the governor of Rome, sent people to take 17 talents safely that was from the temple of Judah, which was the money to be given to God and be used for the temple of God. So these 17 talents they brought. The Jews, because of this, they were very angry because he took the money that was in the temple of God. However, Florus began to collect the money more persistently and viciously. And so the complaints of the Jews became extremely big. Florus executed the ones who were complaining on the cross and despised them and murdered the women and children randomly. That led the battle against the Romans and the Jews. And this battle, it could not be avoided. The Jews couldn't endure it anymore, and they began to cause a riot. Now, Florus coveted the treasure storage in the temple, which had a lot of treasure, because foreign people couldn't go in there. It had made Florus think about what was in there. He wanted to take and steal all the treasures that were in the temple. The Jews couldn't endure the oppression of Florus, and Florus killed all the Jews that slandered him and ignored them. The Jews caused the riot, and finally, the guards of Rome were attacked. Jerusalem fell into the hands of the Jews that caused the riot. And from then on, the Jews stopped the sacrifice offering that was given to Rome, the Roman emperor, every day. From the Romans' point of view, it was nothing but public decoration towards Rome. It was as if this small country of Judah, this very small area, was challenging the great Roman Empire. There was nothing that Florus could do, and he was cornered against the wall. He asked for help from Gallus, the governor of Syria. And so Gallus led the army that was stationed in Syria, leading one corps and many foreigners assisted reins, and he marched to Jerusalem. So this Gallus led this Roman army, and he barged into Jerusalem. However, because the resistance of the Jews was so strong and intense, even though Gallus came to help, he was defeated by the Jews, and they couldn't help but to step back. Now all the rebels of the Jews who caused the riot to begin with, they began to siege the whole nation. So the Jews caused the riot, and they did kick out Florus and the supporting army of Gallus. But the Jews thought that the Romans should not stay there alone. The Romans has the great army and is the strongest country in the world. And because the Jews kicked out the army that was stationed in Jerusalem, that they would soon come back to attack. The Jews predicted that, and they began to defend the city of Jerusalem. So at that time, what the Jews did was they fixed old ramparts, they organized soldiers, and they appointed commanders. One of the most famous people among those commanders, his name was Josephus. He was a famous Jewish historian, and he was appointed as the chief commander in the area of Galilee. Because there are so many things to say to you about the destruction of Jerusalem, but because of the time, we'll finish here. And we'll continue next time. Thank you.